Witches are scary. Eyes of newts, toes of frogs, cauldrons bubbling, dark rituals and hexes and curses, and flying on cleaning appliances, chasing Tam O'Shanter home from the pub and giving his horse a haircut. Yes, witches are scary. But we know nowadays that witches only exist in fiction, books and campfire stories, and occasionally LARPing with magic rocks and burning sage on Tumblr. But witchcraft being something that was known to be exclusively fictional was not always a widely held belief. Back in the day, if something went wrong in your village, anything from crop failure to physical ailments, the townsfolk believed that there was a witch somewhere pulling the strings. And as good, God-fearing citizens, you would have to do your best to root out these devil-worshipping heretics and protect your family. Of course, nowadays we know that it's viruses and bacteria and parasites that cause these tragedies, but in the grim darkness of the distant past, there is only witch hunts. Leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get into the video, it is in fact your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is bringing the console gaming experience to your phone with its stunning graphics and addictive gameplay that lets you take on the enemy in any way that you want. There are over 600 champions and millions of champion combinations, so the sky is the limit when it comes to assembling your team to take down bosses, conquer the Doom Tower, and dish out some pain in my favourite game mode, the PvP Arena. Now that Halloween is right around the corner, Raid is celebrating the spookiest of occasions with the spookiest of champions, and here are my top 3 favourites. To kick off, we have Brachus, a giant werewolf with awesome purple eyes, and he looks like a very mean boy. And it's simply not Halloween without werewolves. And at number 2, we have Madame Ceres. You know why. And my personal favourite has to be Harvest Jack, because man's got a jack-o'-lantern for a head, and he's got severed heads chained to his armour, and a giant scythe, and everybody's on his way to give everyone some pumpkin-spiced lacerations. What a spooky man! All these champions and more are part of Raid's awesome Halloween schedule, which also includes special events and activities with tournaments, big rewards, and special fragment events to get some of the new legendary champions. Raid is bigger and busier than ever, with some giant updates on the horizon, and there's no better time than now to get started. So, if you want a head start in Raid Shadow Legends so that you can get in on all the spooky action, you can click my link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to get 200,000 silver, an XP booster, an energy refill, an ancient shard, and the epic champion Chonoru, who is a force to be reckoned with in the Doom Tower. All of these rewards are available for just the next 30 days, and you can find them all here in your inbox. Witch hunts have been around for as long as superstition has been around. In ancient Egypt and ancient Babylonia, there were laws put into place to punish people who put spells on other people. The Hebrew and Christian Bibles also condemn sorcery, and even the Roman Republic and later Roman Empire had their own laws to protect against evil spells. But, ironically, the Roman witch hunts began to fade to the background as the Roman pantheon of gods was supplanted by Christianity. But the prosecution of alleged sorcerers in antiquity isn't what you think of when you think witch hunt. You imagine inquisitors in holy garb grabbing heretics from off the street and throwing them onto a pyre to burn. Well, the witch hunting in Europe may have died when Christianity took over the Roman Empire, But it wasn't long until it made a comeback. In the early days of the medieval period, the church largely dismissed the existence of witchcraft as it was a silly pagan superstition, and the only magic in this world are the divine miracles of our Lord in heaven. This attitude, however, changed during the 13th century, most likely due to the works of the monk St. Thomas Aquinas, who proposed that humans could gain supernatural powers by making deals with the devil, and they could maintain their powers by causing suffering and pleasing the devil. While these ideas were being spread by good old Tommy Boy, an Inquisition branch was opened up in Toulouse, France by Pope Gregory IX in 1233. The Inquisition at this point in history was less about hunting witches though, as each branch of the Inquisition had their own specific brand of heresy that they were attempting to root out. Right now they were focused more on rebellious offshoots of the church, like the Cathars. The Cathars believed that the New Testament God was the good God that they knew, and that the God in the Old Testament was actually the one now known as Satan. Heretics. Exterminated. Mostly. Another such group was the Waldensians, who are a proto-Protestant group who reject ideas like holy water actually being holy, or holy relics being anything more than just a pile of old bones. This was a much less successful extermination by the Inquisition, as they are actually still around. But they still felt the fury of the church and suffered great persecution under the Inquisition. While minor witch hunts would occur, the first major period of witch trials that would herald an age of witch trials to come were known as the Valais witch trials, taking place in the French-speaking Lower Valais region and spreading over German-speaking regions over the course of 6 to 8 years. According to a proclamation from local authorities, an accusation from 3 or 4 neighbours was all it took for you to be credibly outed as a witch. And this went for nobles as well as peasants. If accused in such a manner, you could be imprisoned, just because a few neighbours think you're suspicious. It's like a homeowners association, but slightly less evil. However, if 5, 6 or 7 people accused you of witchcraft and none of them themselves had been accused, you could be imprisoned and tortured for a confession. The knock-on effect was that if you were being tortured, you would accuse a bunch of random other people to try and save yourself. And if 3 different people said your name under torture, then you would also be dragged to the torture chamber. According to Johannes Frund, a contemporary Swiss chronicler, some people were tortured to death without ever confessing, while others confessed such deeds as causing illness, killing and eating children, or even causing impotence. A few other witchy things that people apparently partook in were flying, but not with broomsticks. They would apparently apply salves to chairs and then take off like Inspector Gadget. Another few things were turning into werewolves and brewing invisibility potions, which, if you have invisibility potions, how did you get caught? The number of supposed witches killed in the trials is unknown, but it's been recorded that 2 years into the trials, 700 witches had been accused, and 200 had been burned at the stake. Surprisingly, in contrast to later witch hunts, around 2/3 of the witches burned were men, not women. Although back then, witch was a term used for anyone who had gained powers through a deal with the devil, rather than being the female counterpart to wizard as it's thought about today. Although the Valais trials were odd Christian behaviour at the time, soon after the trials, witchcraft came into a lot of discussion in Christian circles, and many people began to think against a document known as the Canon Episcopi, the document that solidified the Church's original position of the devil influences the mind, not the material world, ergo, witches are not real. Three of the major figures in speaking against this document were two Dominican inquisitors, John Vinet and Nicholas Jacquier, and the Bishop of Avila, Alfonso Tostado. Jacquier especially was a champion of battling the Canon Episcopi, describing several trials he witnessed, such as the trial of Guillaume Edelin, a low-ranking prior who confessed to witchcraft and was the first recorded person to claim that he could fly on a broomstick. He apparently sealed his pact with the devil by kissing the devil's posterior while in the guise of a sheep. Guillaume, in all likelihood, never visited Wales, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did. With a belief in witchcraft growing throughout Europe, it was only a matter of time before the Canon Episcopi was replaced by a new page-turner, a book that would become the manual for witch-hunting zealots over the coming years. In 1486, Heinrich Kramer published the book with the most amazing name in the world, the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the most Warhammer name I have ever heard for a book, though the book was also known as the Hammer of Witches. As for how the book came to be, Heinrich Kramer was the inquisitor for Tyrol, Salzburg, Bohemia and Moravia, and was recognised as a tireless servant of the Church, yet his inquisitorial status was still challenged frequently in the courts. This was until 1484, when a papal bull was published by Pope Innocent VIII, which acknowledged the existence of witches and put on paper the Inquisition's power to prosecute witches. With his newfound power, or at least the affirmation of power that he had, Kramer went to the city of Innsbruck in Austria to begin hunting witches. While in Innsbruck, one woman who Kramer was obsessed with seeing burn was one Helena Schuberin. This may have been because she had actual cause to be a witch, but it was most likely because she cursed him out in public, spitting at him and saying, "Fie on you, you bad monk, may the falling evil take you." Later, during one of Kramer's sermons, she loudly proclaimed that he was an evil man in league with the devil. Kramer then accused her and 6 other women of sorcery, but local authorities still considered sorcery a mild offence, so the women were let off with no sentence or a mild sentence of only having to do penance. This greatly angered Kramer, who stayed in Innsbruck to continue investigating, but he was commanded to leave by the Bishop of Brixen. So Kramer did what all butthurt egomaniacs do when in Austria. He travelled to Germany and wrote a book about killing people that he thought caused all of the problems in the world. And that book was the Malleus Maleficarum. The Malleus Maleficarum, I love that name so much, is a treatise on witchcraft and was basically a witch hunter's manual used throughout the period of mass witch hunting as a way to identify, prosecute and execute witches. Although the execution just came under the same general punishment that all major detractors of the church got. Burn the heretic. The manual was massively popular, despite major members within the Inquisition speaking out against it, saying it was unethical and inconsistent with contemporary Catholic beliefs on demonology. Using the newly invented Gutenberg printing press, the Malleus Maleficarum was reproduced en masse and distributed among several church and Inquisition officials, and with this book fully branding all sorcerers as heretics, witch trials became a very prevalent occurrence for the next couple of centuries. Now, witch trials became such a common occurrence over the coming centuries that I couldn't possibly include every trial that ever took place. This is because the real-world Inquisition had the same motto as the Warhammer Inquisition. Innocence proves nothing. So there were a lot of witch trials. A lot of witch trials. Far too many for me to go into. But I do have a few bits and pieces that I consider to be exceptionally noteworthy. In 1590, there were trials in North Berwick in Scotland, which were set up by King James VI. He believed that witches were making attempts on his life after he encountered stormy weather when sailing back from Denmark, where he was collecting his new bride. Life was so easy back in the day. Literally anything that went wrong back then, you could just burn a random person and hope it was witchcraft all along. When the fleet returned to Scotland, the Danish admiral blamed witches for the storm as well, as apparently boat sinking was just a known pastime for witches, and they held trials in Copenhagen. Upon hearing of the Copenhagen witch trials, King James thought it was such a good idea that he stole it and began holding his own trials, and he arrested over 100 alleged witches in North Berwick, as apparently their coven met there at the Old Kirk Green. Many of these witches confessed under torture that they had met the devil in the church at night and had planned to do all kinds of nefarious deeds with him. The torture that you could be put under in order to extract a confession for witchcraft was downright medieval, if you'll pardon the pun. One man, Dr. John Fian, a schoolmaster, had his fingernails forcibly extracted and then iron prongs shoved into the raw flesh where his nails used to be. His thumbs were put into thumbscrews and his foot was crushed by a medieval torture device known only as the boot. This was actually after he had apparently bewitched a man directly in front of the king, and while undergoing this brutal punishment, it is apparently reported that he expressed no pain. He didn't react at all. Eventually, when the torturers got sick of him being no fun, Fian was strangled to death and then burned. And of course, we can't do a video on witch trials without mentioning the most famous ones, the Salem witch trials. But the Salem witch trials weren't nearly as lethal as you would think for such an iconic and easily the best known group of witch trials. You know, in contrast to the European trials, which had death tolls in the hundreds, the Salem trials only convicted 30 witches, only 20 of whom were killed, if you don't count the 5 that died in jail. The true alpha of the Salem trials was one accused witch known as Giles Corey. He was a man that was initially swept up in the mass hysteria of the event, and he actually believed accusations made against his own wife that she was a witch. And he held that belief right up until he himself was accused of being a witch. While being questioned, Giles refused to confess, but also refused to say that he was innocent, which resulted in his imprisonment. Giles had more accusations thrown at him during his trial, but after all of that, he still refused to plead. Because of the way the law worked at the time, people who don't plead cannot be properly tried. So they had to get a plea out of him through a method known as pressing. This involved stripping him down to his undies and placing him between 2 boards, and then adding boulders on top until the weight was unbearable. This torture could be stopped at any time by simply pleading guilty or not guilty. But Giles, at the age of 80, remained resolute and didn't even show pain as the weights were laid on. After 2 days, the sheriff came to Giles to try and get a plea. But each time, Giles simply said, "More weight." Later that day, after the additional weight was added at Giles' request, he died. His last words may have been an additional request of more weight, but some sources say that it could have been either more rocks or "Damn you, I curse you, and Salem." It's possible that the brutal death of Giles contributed to the decline of the witch trials in Salem, but all over the world, the golden age of the witch hunt was coming to a close anyway. By the 1700s, witch trials were so unpopular that the House of Commons passed the 1735 Witchcraft Act, which fully outlawed the hunting and execution of witches in Great Britain. And it's kind of funny how supposed malicious devil worshippers were given freedom before slavery was abolished or before being gay was legal. However, despite all of that, witch hunts still occur all over the world, but far less than the amount that took place during the mass hysteria caused by the malleus maleficarum. There are a few good stories that happened more recently, and by recently I mean 1895. In Ireland, one woman named Bridget Cleary was murdered and set alight by her husband because he believed that the real Bridget had been taken away by fairies, and that the Bridget that he saw now was a changeling witch that had been left in her place. Scholars estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people have been executed for witchcraft throughout history, not including unrecorded and unofficial lynchings. And with sources of witch hunts happening in locations all over the globe, there must be something within the human psyche that makes us fear those who may wield supernatural power beyond our understanding. And even to this day, there are some people out there who are afraid of magic. But much less so because of their faith in the Lord and fear of the devil. Nowadays, it's mostly those magicians at kids' birthday parties. I don't trust them. Shifty bastards.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody just subscribe!